Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 5th of October 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, very blustery here in Plymouth, but we've got lots of blue sky and sunshine, and that seems to be the pattern across UK. Even north of the border in Scotland, it is apparently quite sunny.
Good stuff.
There we are. Into the good news.
Yes. Okay, well, we'll begin with UKIP because they are leaderless again. Well, actually, apparently not, Brian, because you were saying the Electoral Commission has said that...
Technically, Mr. Farron is still in charge of the party, apparently.
Okay, well, Diane James then has resigned after 18 days, and it's, you know, we're only getting a hint of what went on, but it sounds like total faction fighting within the UKIP leadership once again.
Well, I've got to say, Mike, that I've taken a little bit of flack, I think is the term, recently, because I pointed a finger at the leadership of UKIP. I was doing this several years ago, and I'm going to continue to do it because, of course, we see, particularly now, just at the point when UKIP, with 4 million voters or over 4 million voters, should be hammering the government to get us fully out of Europe and start to get law and order restored in this country. What have we got? We've got infighting at the top of UKIP. We've got blocks coming in. And all this means, of course, that the activists are not out there being active. I personally blame Nigel Farage for this. I've warned about Nigel Farage taking UKIP into a cul-de-sac for years. And I think what I've said is now being proved. So presumably the new leader tried to make some changes to get the party moving, and her efforts to change the executive were blocked.
That sounds like it. She said, according to the Sky report, she said, it has become increasingly clear that I do not have sufficient authority. Now, she just won a leadership election. How does she not have sufficient authority? So, you know, at least with the Labour Party, when Corbyn finds he doesn't have sufficient authority, it's because most of the Labour Party are Blairites, and so there's history there. What is UKIP's excuse in this case?
Well, it's always the same excuse, Mike, and that is that basically senior people on that executive committee have their own ideas as to what should be happening, and they block other initiatives. This has been going on in UKIP for years, and of course, if you analyse it, there's been lots of flag waving. Of course, it was Nigel Farage saying, we're out of Europe after the Brexit vote. Well, that was one of the most dangerous statements that's been made, because clearly we're not out of Europe. And now what have we got? Stagnation again in UKIP. This is not accidental. This is a cabal within the executive committee of UKIP.
Indeed. Well, let's go to David Davis, who is the minister responsible for getting us out of Europe, in inverted commas. Well, he's been speaking at a fringe meeting at the Tory party conference and basically reflecting the views of your favourite MP.
My favourite, I've got so many.
Gary Streeter. Basically right. Saying that because there was some questions asked about some of the comments or some of the claims made leading up to the referendum. And he said that the referendum issue, the issue of leaving Europe, had inspired passions. And he said that, you know, not everything that was said before the referendum was capable of being repeated on oath. But that's all right.
Yeah. Well, Mike, we've got this inversion of reality going on at the moment. What does he say? What is important is not what's said.
Yes.
Okay, so speech is no longer important. What you say doesn't actually mean anything. Then we've got Gary Streeter. Let's just remind our viewers and listeners today. So we've got Southwest Devon MP Gary Streeter, Tory Gary Streeter, saying, well, there's no such thing as truth. It's really whatever you
like.
Yeah, whatever you really feel like. So presumably Gary Streeter's view of truth is being applied to Brexit.
Well, that's exactly what David Davis is saying, inspiring passions, just whatever you feel like at the time. Of course, we're seeing all this type of rhetoric in the media at the moment. This is The Guardian today. We're witnessing nothing less than a Tory reformation, and he's discussing what's going on at the conference. And this view that the Tory party is changing in some way, that Theresa May is bringing a new brand of leadership of some kind, absolutely reflected on the BBC's Today programme this morning, pretty much coming from the same angle. Well, I suppose that's just as well, because with Labour and UKIP in civil war, it's likely we're going to see Theresa around for about a decade, more than a decade. It's a bit of a depressing thought, but there you go. But this article from The Guardian, from Raphael Baer, promotes lies about what was announced yesterday, what we discussed yesterday. He said, nor does it matter that the measures announced by May as proof of intent, and he lists them: activation of Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty and a great repeal bill to disentangle European and UK law, are less exciting than she made them out to be. So he's saying it doesn't really matter that they're less exciting. But the problem here is that Mr. Baer, he's correct in one sense. Her announcements were less than exciting, but he again states that the Great Repeal Bill will disentangle European and UK laws. And of course, this is a downright lie, because if we remind ourselves what David Davis said yesterday, he said, to ensure continuity, we will take a simple approach. EU law will be transposed into domestic law wherever practical on exit day. Now, of course, Theresa May had two options here. She could have really had a great repeal, as she likes to call it, and repealed every piece of EU-born legislation since 1972, in which case the previous UK legislation would have again stood. But instead, she's chosen to transpose EU legislation. That legislation will continue. Nothing has changed. So, for example, any farmer hoping to see the end of the Common Agricultural Policy, or any fisherman hoping to see an end of the Common Fisheries Policy, they're likely to be disappointed. And what's more, we could see the scenario, since both EU and UK law will still be sitting on the same foundations after this so-called Great Repeal Bill. We could see the scenario that future UK governments will just keep UK law in sync with EU law as we go. So I think that's what we're going to see. And I'm going to say it again, Brian, Brexit is no Brexit. It's more of the same. It's status quo. The policies are going to remain the same. Nothing has changed. And of course, UKIP is in such turmoil that they're not in a position to do anything about this.
Yeah, they absolutely might. UKIP should be the party that is absolutely blasting out the media at the moment to show the sheer hypocrisy of what's going on in the Conservative government. So they should be exposing the PSYOP, as we've called it, of Brexit. And what are they doing? They're back navel gazing with infighting. Yeah. There's a reason for it, and it's at the top of UKIP. Well, one area which clearly shows that Brexit is an illusion is what's happening with the military. And of course, David Ellis from Strategic Defence Initiatives has been warning about the ongoing integration of Britain's military. And of course, one of the key ways that this is happening is through the procurement and supply chain. But let's have a look at some other things going on inside of the military. And thank you very much to David for pointing this out to us, because General Sir Nicholas Carter, that's not in pictured, I'll come on to the gentleman in the picture in a minute, but Sir General Nicholas Carter, who's boss of the British Army, was giving a talk at Chatham House, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and his talk was on change and adaptability in the British Army. And the gentleman in the photograph there, James Devol, was the chair for that talk. He happens to be a consulting fellow of Chatham House, whatever that means, but his claim to fame is that he did work for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. So let's bring in the General. Here he is. And my goodness, this is Nuspeak on reheat. This is probably faster than F-35, Mike. We've got an army which is going to change and evolve. It's not going to be revolution, but it's going to be evolution. And the General's got very excited because he's talking about himself and his other senior officers, are responsible for what he describes as our finite resources. So you would have thought that a general being told you've actually got no money to run a proper army would be absolutely banging the table and speaking out, saying that in the first place he needs the money for the right equipment. No, he's not doing any of that. what he's doing is wallowing in Nuspeak. And some of this is not only quite incredible, it's quite frightening stuff. So let's have a look at how he goes on. This is a key bit here, if we can pop that up. There we are. We need to be match fit to run the business. So apparently the British Army has become a business, and the General says that because it's a business, we need to use all the right language. So we're going to be talking about efficiency, productivity, prosperity, and communication. And all of this is going to take place within the goldfish bowl of scrutiny. And we've got to do everything properly in order to retain our license to operate. So it's a business. It's going to be looking at efficiency, productivity. Presumably that's measured in the number of dead people. And they're going to retain a license to operate. Now, is that a figment of speech, the license to operate? Or is he talking about something the public's not aware of?
Well, that sounds very much like it, because government awards licenses to corporate entities whenever they're providing a service, right?
Indeed. But he says here it's a business. There's no ifs or buts. That's the language. So let's bring in a bit more. And here he is. So he's talking about fusing all the available levers of national power against multiple audiences to deliver successful outcomes. You understand what's going on here, Mike? We haven't got enough money for decent armoured vehicles. We haven't got the right equipment, soldiers out in Afghanistan without the gear. But we are going to fuse all the available levers of national power against multiple audiences to deliver successful outcomes. And following the Forces Review 2015 and the Army 2020 review, I'm implementing my big idea. And he starts to wax lyrical about his big idea when he was a commander out in Afghanistan. But all of this is going to be summed as integrated action by the Army. And on it goes. He was talking about 77 Brigade. We'll have a little look at those in a minute. We need to change behaviour by non-kinetic means, soft rather than hard, new types of operational art. Distinction between peace and war has apparently become blurred, Mike. So the army's deployed overseas. It's not because we've gone to war. It's presumably because everybody's got a little bit confused about whether peace is war or war is peace. And we need to be persistently engaged overseas so that we can understand them. And what he's saying about this is that he thinks that we've got to have the military permanently embedded in locations overseas so that we can really understand the local people and hence how we're going to use our non-kinetic means to rule over them.
Isn't it mildly amusing that we were for a few minutes watching a TEDx this morning with Julian Middleton talking about cultural intelligence and how we've got to have cultural intelligence in order to understand people from other cultures and overseas. Well, he's reflecting this, isn't he?
This is the language. This man has clearly been heavily reframed. And of course, we had the head of the RAF, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he was getting excited that he had the people with the right aperture coming into the RAF. This is behavioural change that's been unleashed. These men have been seriously reframed. And I'm going to say this is some of the most dangerous language that I have ever read with regard to the people controlling British military. But of course, where does the policy come from? Well, let's come back to Michael Farron. And this was his comment which we pointed out the other day. I want more recruits from ethnic minorities, more women. There's now a great big organisation simply for the women in the Army, as there is in the Navy and the RAF. I've opened up all combat roles to women, so ability, not gender, defines how far you can go. So just think about what that actually means. Let's get the women into the front line. This isn't about tokenism, it's about talent. And in fact, the General himself gets very, very excited at that Chatham House talk about talent. So how can we sum up this? Well, this is part of the General's Twitter page. And he's got very excited here because the maximising talent stand was at the Royal United Services Institute Land Warfare Conference. And there it is, maximising talent. This is the Army's plan. Are you ready for this? We'll just I was going to say blow it up, but that's probably an unfortunate term. We'll expand it. And what are they actually doing? Well, they've got strategy, data and science. We've got human performance. We've got talent development. We've got improving behaviours. So that's half the pie chart, is that sort of language. Before, people would have said, well, we need to have a training organisation and get people trained. But no, we're going to go for human performance, talent development. We're going to improve behaviours. We're going to win opportunities, and we're going to have employment contracts to get people really excited. The General does admit that recruiting is a disaster at the moment, largely because it's been put in hands of a commercial organisation. Well, he doesn't say that, but what he doesn't give is any plans to actually improve the recruiting. So this is the language supposedly driving Britain's military. And I wonder whether President Putin is lying in bed awake in fear, in awe of the acumen of the head of the British Army.
Well, we might have a clue about that shortly, but we'll come on to that.
I thought so. Well, let's bring in the 77th Brigade, which the General mentioned. Here they are. Encourage people to go and read this for yourselves. Some absolutely amazing stuff here. Let's have a look at it. 77th Brigade is a combined regular army and Army Reserve unit. It draws specialists on a nationwide basis. The new brigade aims to challenge the difficulties of modern warfare using non-lethal engagement and legitimate non-military levers as a means to adapt behaviours of the opposing forces and adversaries. And so we've got a variety of columns, a bit cheeky of them to use that name, I thought, Mike. We've got column number 1, planning support, focusing on the behavioural analysis of actors, audiences and adversaries. Is this creating black ops, do you think? Using actors, do they mean actors? I wonder what they do, perhaps. Providing the detailed synchronisation and delivery of effect, whatever that is. Highly deployable specialists to other parts of the armed forces and other government organisations. So presumably we've now got quasi-military people being embedded in other government organisations. That sounds good. And we've got professional specialists in security capacity building and defence. And we've got media operations and civil affairs. So we're not going to be telling the truth about what our military are doing overseas. We're going to have specialist media teams, presumably spinning the line.
So legitimate non-military levers as a means to adapt behaviours of the opposing forces. Are they going to sit across the battlefield with some tannoys and hurl NLP at them?
I think we are talking psyops with a vengeance here, but let's bear in mind, of course, we've now got military operatives basically operating as if they're in front of a video game with drones, killing people who've never had the opportunity to appear in a court. So take that General's language, heavily reframed individual. Can he think properly anymore? Common sense? I think this is very dangerous. So we'll just let that one run. And the comment here was that war is peace. The truth has become blurred or non-existent, according to Gary Street, a Conservative MP. And we've got this lot being run by Army PSYOPs units.
Yes. Well, another day, another exercise, and this time it's UK, New Zealand, Australia, Malaysia, Singapore, and it's the Royal Air Force Typhoon aircraft flown by one fighter squadron from RAF Lossiemouth, excuse me, and they are in Malaysia, taking part in an exercise there. Exercise Bersama Lima 16. It includes Army, Navy, and Air Force servicemen from the participating nations. So that's good stuff. And then the other piece of sort of war news at the moment is that Russia has announced that it's sending an advanced missile system to Syria. So this is the S-300 missile system going to Tartus. Well, the West are apparently getting a bit upset about this. And it does give a clue. The next quote does give a clue that perhaps Russia's beginning to have a little bit of fun. They're just starting to take the mickey out of everybody at the moment. Because, of course, NATO has been saying for quite a long time. Don't worry about the missile defense shield. It's purely defensive. So Russia has issued a response from the defense ministry. Igor here, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his surname.
Konashenkov, I reckon.
So it's Konashenkov, yep. Saying the S-300 is a purely defensive system and poses no threat to anyone. It's not clear why the placement of S-300s in Syria has caused such a stir amongst our Western colleagues. So, you know, it's good fun for them to be able to get their own back here.
Yeah, and what are we watching? We're watching the US, we're watching Theresa May, and of course the UK government just lost as to what they should be doing at the moment.
Yeah.
They're still in the theatre of Nuspeak when presumably the Russians have decided to get serious.
Yes.
Well, the country, UK that is in chaos. And on the 19th of November, the British Constitution Group is going to be talking about the breakdown of law and order in this country and the need to reassert the rule of law. We are getting a fantastic response at the moment to this. We're going to be talking about speakers over the forthcoming days, and we have some quality speakers, but we're also very much looking at what can we do to regain law and order in a country where that system has broken down. So the 19th of November is a date for your diary. And we're just going to say, get out there and challenge your MPs and do stay with it. In a minute, Mike is going to talk a little bit about what's happened with Michael Farron.
Tim Farron.
Tim Farron on the subject of missing Syrian children. And the only reason that we've really got a really excellent wedge in his door is because a lady decided to stay on his case over the children. So if you're listening to events and you're beginning to think, my goodness, what can we do? The answer is to do something and stay on the case. Polite, reasonable behaviour can work wonders. And then just a reminder from Theo that British Constitution Group is still very keen to hear from people in the Milton Keynes, Lincoln, Totnes and Southampton areas. And I understand that actually there was quite a good response from our request yesterday. So we've already got some names of people in those areas. But we're going to add to that. We're also very keen for more people north of the border who are interested in the Constitution, how it affects both Scotland, England, Wales, Ireland. We say we're all living in these islands together, and what's important is to stay working together to understand just how our constitution and respective systems of law has been overturned by the criminal cabal in Westminster. So some text here, I won't read through it all, but you can freeze it and have a look at that a little bit later today. But essentially a network of Scottish constitutionalists is now being set up. We've got a number of interested people, and we are very, very interested to hear from more people north of the border who are starting to look at this initiative. So there we go. Children, Mike.
Yes, children. Okay, Tim Farron then. Now, this goes back to the beginning of the year when Tim Farron was demanding that refugee children from Syria are taken into Britain and helped, in inverted commas. The point I was making at the time was that Britain can't even help British children who are in care, and to bring Syrian refugee children into the country is taking them out of the frying pan into the fire. Now, I've labelled this as facilitating child trafficking, and I'll explain that in a second. But basically, Tim Farron refused to answer the simple question at the time from me, what he would do to prevent children that are being brought into this country as refugees, being put in care, what he would do to prevent them disappearing into the system, or more importantly, disappearing out of the system into child trafficking child trafficking rings. Would he be tracking these children until the age of 18, personally, or not? And he refused to answer. So if you remember, I asked at the time for other people to get involved. Now, the key point here was that I was highlighting that 140,000 children, according to the Home Office in 2010, 140,000 children going missing in the UK each year. Now, most of those children come back. Some of them don't. And the key point we were making at the time is that nobody knows. Nobody knows how many children disappear, not only from the care system, but from society at large, and just disappear, never to be seen again. So this report here was from 2012. It was the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Runaway and Missing Children and Adults. The inquiry was co-chaired by Anne Coffey MP. Basically they were saying that there is a scandal going on in England involving children missing from care, and until recent cases of child sexual exploitation in Rochdale and other places put the spotlight on the issue, it was going on pretty much unnoticed. And according to the report, 68,000 children in care in the UK, and they said that local authority with responsibility for a child is required to report whether they have run away for more than 24 hours to the Department of Education once a year. Data for 2011 shows that 930 individual children went missing. Using this measure of going missing for over 24 hours, police figures suggest 17,000 incidents and 5,000 individual children going missing from care every year. The report went on to say there are also major problems with the quality of data collected on trafficked children. The number recorded by CEOP, approximately 300 between 2007 and 2010, is widely thought to be the very tip of the iceberg, and the lack of robust and comprehensive data was also identified by the inquiry as the key obstacle to keeping these children safe. So the key point here is this report was written in 2012, 4 years ago. Nothing has changed since, and this report was pointing out that this problem had gone on for a very long time. Now, as Brian says, one person in particular, and that's Lottie, was on Tim Farron's case and has stayed on Tim Farron's case, and she wrote an email to him. Its text is probably a bit small, so it's hard to read, so I'll just read it out. It says, Mr. Farron, I'm very pleased to hear the news that you will host an urgent summit to discuss unaccompanied asylum-seeking children who have fled conflict, poverty and persecution. I feel this is a long overdue and perhaps a little late. I'm hearing the closing of the stable doors after the horses have bolted. In 2015, you raised the motion for leave to bring a bill re-asylum. Had you not then, in 2015, given any thought to what would become of these children once on British soil? Had you not, in 2015, given any iota of thought to how these children will be kept safe from harm? And so she goes on. Now, Mr. Farron didn't reply, as he didn't reply to me. And eventually, he was written to again. He's written to several times, but eventually the email went, Mr. Farron, are you hiding? Please answer my emails. And this apparently did garner a response. So let's just have a look at what Tim Farron had to say. He said, like you, I was shocked and appalled to see the figures last month, which showed that hundreds of refugee children are currently missing in the UK. These numbers are absolutely disgraceful. Unaccompanied refugee children are some of the most vulnerable in our society, and it's likely that many of these missing children will now be in the hands of traffickers and gangs. That's quite an acknowledgement from Tim Farron. He went on to say, the government must urgently review its process to ensure that children can't simply vanish from care. Once Parliament returns from its recess period on Monday, I will formally ask the new Home Secretary to provide details about what concrete measures her department is taking to ensure that unaccompanied refugee children who arrive in the UK are monitored and kept safe by the relevant authorities, and locate the hundreds of refugee children who have gone missing in the UK in the last 5 years. Rest assured, that is still an incredibly important issue for my party, and myself and my colleagues continue to work to pressure the government to take more refugees from Europe and ensure that they're kept safe once they're here. Well, the key point here, Brian, is it not, is this idea from Tim Farron that he was shocked and appalled, but the government must urgently review its processes. No mention of a police investigation, no mention of...
It's incredible, Mike. The publicly released figures were that over 300 Syrian children had disappeared in this country. And Tim Farron says, well, what we need to do is really have a look at our procedures. Right. Children have disappeared, 300 of them. There should be a police investigation immediately, and they should be on the case of what's happened to these children, and they should stop all of the other procedures for bringing more children if they can't guarantee their safety.
And the key point is that government procedures were reviewed in 2012. Nothing has changed. So what's the point of having another review? I'd just like to put Tim Farron's photograph back on the screen here. And I want to ask this man, what are you personally going to do to identify the locations of these 300 Syrian children that have already disappeared in this country, as you were warned that they would?
Yeah.
At the start of the year, you were warned that they would disappear. They have disappeared. You've done nothing. You're going to do nothing. And I think I'm going to ask everybody today to start putting some serious pressure on this man, because this is the man who started the campaign to get these children into this country in the first place.
Yeah. So this is the situation. It's not 1 or 2 or 10 or 30 children disappear. The government is aware over 300, I think the figure was 325 or 328 children simply disappeared. And all Tim Farron can say is, well, we need to just review our procedures. These children might be being tortured, they might be being used for sex films, whatever it is. And he just says, well, we need to review procedures. And it's taken him since January 2016 to come up with this pathetic reply. Well, why does he think like that? I think we get a clue from this document. This has come from the British Embassy in Dublin. It's in relation to the Doherty family. And of course, what is this? It is a complete and utter fob off. It thanks the gentleman for his letter of the 16th of August regarding Mr. and Mrs. Doherty. The letter was originally sent to Boris Johnson. Well, of course, waste of space there. I've been asked to respond. I regret to inform you that we're unable to comment on individual consular cases. I can, however, advise you that the British Embassy in Dublin is fully aware of the circumstances relating to the Doherty family and the children. So he's saying, the gentleman, Harry Carberry, who is intimately linked with Scotland, that the British government knows that these children have been taken off their parents without one scrap of evidence for why those children have been taken. So he's admitting he knows that, and then he's saying, but we're not going to do anything about it. This is exactly the same as Mr. Farron. And what we've got to remind ourselves is that this is Theresa May. Theresa May, Home Secretary at the time these children disappeared, Home Secretary at the time the Syrian children disappeared, and of course Home Secretary at the time that a disastrous inquiry was sort of set up. So this is the rubber stamping that the British government knows it is involved in the stealing, trafficking, and ultimately torture, murder of children. It openly knows this is going on, and it simply says to the British public, we don't care whether you're worried about the situation at all. It's absolutely in our faces now. And the reason that the British government cannot investigate is because the trail of child abuse leads straight back to members of Parliament who are sitting running all of the organisations which say that they're there to protect children. And if we remind people, and certainly if you haven't seen the interview or listened to the interview with the Metropolitan Police officer talking about how government ministers, local authorities, charities and other individuals close down police investigations into children in London, please listen to that. And of course, that gentleman has had absolutely no help from any of the government authorities, including Mr. Brandon Lewis, the policing minister. Well, what has Theresa May been doing? Well, she's been working hard on her image. And of course, what is she very frightened of? She's frightened of the fact that more and more particularly ex-members of the armed forces are starting to see through the scam, which is the British government. So we thought it appropriate that General Nick Carter, who we've just mentioned, is tweeting. He's very big on tweeting. Of course, you'd expect that man to have plenty of time for sending out little tweets. And so here's Theresa. What is she doing? Cuddling up to the armed forces. And I think she's trying to, or there's an effort being made at the moment to rebrand her as the Iron Lady. And here she is, the caring Prime Minister. She's very caring as long as the cameras are there with her cup of tea. But if your children get taken, ladies, you'll find you're dealing with a different beast. And here she is, the darling of the armed forces, The general's very impressed that she's there, looking very, very smart. And of course, he had to get one in with himself. And it was Michael Fallon bowing to her, I think there, Mike, actually. So Theresa May is being heavily rebranded as the Iron Lady. And presumably this is because she's totally incapable of running the country. This is another puppet.
Indeed. Now, TTIP may be dead in the water, but as we've been reporting for a number of weeks, Theresa May is determined that the UK is going to be a global leader in free trade. So what is the point here? Well, she is rebranding Britain. We are going to be Global Britain since Brexit. Global Britain is a hashtag on Twitter if you're following the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Britain, the Britain we build, she says, after Brexit is going to be a global Britain. Now, we have been wondering for quite some years now, actually, which is going to be the main route to global government. And would that be through the United Nations and its policies, or would it be through the Commonwealth? Well, both is probably the answer, but certainly the Commonwealth is now taking a much more leading role. So it's perhaps no surprise that Baroness Scotland is promoting this today, that the Commonwealth should be an honest broker for member states who want to move from the shock of Brexit, to solutions. And of course, what are we talking about? Free trade solutions. So what does she have to say? The Commonwealth is 53 countries, and the challenge of Brexit faces all of them. Our role is to be an honest broker. We have a team of trade and economic experts examining all angles of the likely impact of the UK's decision to leave Europe on Commonwealth countries, and that will form a key part of our discussions in Washington, D.C. this week. They're publishing an analysis of the possible economic implications, and she went on to say again that her role is as an honest broker. So basically, TTIP, everybody says, is failing. Whether that is the case remains to be seen, but nonetheless, global Britain is going to be pushed forward. We're going to be pushing trade deals and the style of TTIP, of course, and the Commonwealth is going to be the mechanism that these globalist trade deals are going to be pushed out. So we keep an eye on that one.
But she's an honest broker, so
yes,
we can trust her and the rest of the government. Well, if we're going global, of course, one of the key levers to get us there is going to be climate change. So this is probably the headline of the century, and that is that Leonardo DiCaprio, I thought he sank on board the Titanic, Mike, or was that, maybe I got that wrong. But he has basically said that climate change deniers should not hold public office. He was in the White House when he was talking about this. He said, if you don't believe in climate change, you don't believe in facts and science and empirical truths, and in my humble opinion, you should not be allowed to hold public office. So we've got this bizarre situation now of DiCaprio in the White House, apparently promoting his so-called documentary Before the Flood. But we're now mixing up actors and politics. It's a bit unclear as to where the real world is. If you're not sure about Before the Flood, it's a genuine documentary, and Mr. DiCaprio has been all over the world talking to people. I was going to say talking to polar bears. He's been watching the polar bears because they've been falling into the water because all the ice is melting. And he says, if you don't believe what I'm pushing out in my documentary, you're not fit for public office. So we got more blurring of truth, fiction, theatre becomes politics, and presumably he's going to be President of the United States at some stage, Mike.
Quite possibly. Okay, privacy issues then. And of course, the big privacy news is that Yahoo had been secretly scanning customers' emails. Anybody with a Yahoo email account should be taking note and handing them over to the US government. So they secretly built, according to this Reuters article, a custom software program to search all of its customers' incoming emails for specific information provided by US intelligence officials. So the US intelligence officials asked them to look for some specific information. Now, Yahoo is absolutely refusing to say what that specific information was, but nonetheless, they decided that the best thing to do was to scan every single mailbox that they were managing for people in order to get the information that was required. So key point here is that this is every single mailbox, regardless of citizenship. It wasn't just Americans being spied on, it was everybody. And according to Andrew Crocker, who's an attorney or a lawyer with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, he said that the Yahoo program seems in some way to be more problematic and broader than anything else that has been revealed about NSA bulk surveillance like PRISM. And he said it's hard to think of an interpretation of this report that doesn't mean Yahoo isn't being asked to scan all domestic communications without a warrant or probable cause. So this is quite interesting. What's also interesting is that Yahoo publishes its government data request statistics, and yet they seem to be suggesting that in total they have only received 23,540 such requests. So that doesn't seem to tie in with this story, which they are not denying. They have admitted that this is the case. Well, we might contrast that with this organization, Open Whisper Systems, and they've released a press release saying that in the first half of 2016, and they're banned from being any more explicit than that, that they received a subpoena from the Eastern District of Virginia in order to provide information about 2 customers of theirs to a federal grand jury investigation. But unfortunately, the only information they hold on their customers is when they signed up and when was the last time they used the service. They don't keep any details about who was sending messages to whom, or when, or what the content of the message was. So unfortunately, they weren't able to provide the information that was asked for. So that's a slightly different approach being taken there. But what's interesting about this story was that when they received the subpoena, they were effectively given a gag order at the same time, and it took the intervention of the ACLU in the United States to overturn that, and which allowed them then to admit that they'd even received the subpoena in the first place.
Right, and presumably the American intelligence services weren't looking for Hillary Clinton's emails because a different set of rules apply to her.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we just end on a Guardian article, which I think really takes some reading. I read it again, and I think that this is a pretty unpleasant little article. The title is "Whether to Have a Down Syndrome Baby, It's Not Black and White. We're stuck in a simplistic debate in which the tragedy of having a disabled child is set against the selfishness of abortion. Time for some grey." Well, this woman certainly stirs the grey pot, and I read this article against the background that we see a government increasingly saying, well, if you're too old, you can't work and pay your taxes. If you're disabled, you can't work and you pay your taxes. We'd rather just help you off the planet with a little bit of whatever it is. So I think this is another article moving towards basically saying we don't want people with any form of disability in the new society, and that's a society which seems to be coming in pretty quickly. Before it goes out of my mind, it hasn't escaped us that we've apparently now got an order for new UK ballistic nuclear submarines, never mind the right or wrong of that order, but we found it highly amusing that apparently the steel is going to be provided by France, because presumably the Conservative government has succeeded in closing down British steel production, with a little bit of help of the Kinnock family, of course, who was involved, and of course Common Purpose. So here we've got another example that we're supposedly out of Europe in a military sense. No, we're not, because we're beholden on the French to even produce the steel for those vessels. This is treason, Mike. And
of course, as you said earlier, the steel then get the specification for the steel.
Of course. So
the French.
Yeah. And we still haven't heard anything about the manning of our forthcoming aircraft carriers. But the UK column said that once the aircraft appear, if indeed they ever do, we can expect to see the need for French forces, French crews to come in to help man those aircraft carriers. The word is treason. We're watching a complete breakdown of law and order in the UK, and that itself is best evidenced by the fact that over 300 children disappear, and the British government says, well, we don't really care. we may need to review policy, but we don't care. Thank you for joining us. To help us do what we do, we need your support. If you haven't taken out a donation with the UK column, please consider doing that, or maybe make us a donation. We do need your help to do what we do, and we would like to expand. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.